So the other thing I wanted to tell you about was this other couple that we had. And I mentioned before, I think they were fleeing MS-13 in El Salvador. Beautiful young couple. I would say they're early 20s, 22, 23. And the mother was pregnant. And they had a court date. They had a court date in San Diego. So they'd already, gone through the asylum paperwork, but the Border Patrol wouldn't let them through. And they wouldn't let them through because they could tell that she was like 8 months pregnant, right? She was showing a lot. And so they didn't want her to be able to have a baby on the other side of the border. So they just simply refused to let her in, even though she was legally authorized to go through. And it took us calling up the chain of command saying, look, we've got a court order to let her through, and standing at midnight outside the border shouting at Border Patrol until they finally let them through. And then again, they go to the refrigerator, even though she's 8 months pregnant. Now, these people, when they were fleeing El Salvador, were being chased by gangs.
Yes.
And then when they got to Mexico, they were still being called and threatened and demanding money from them, or the gangs were going to come and kill them. So we had to, and normally you're not supposed to like give gifts or something like that to your clients, but fuck that, right? Here, we hid them in a hotel for the day or two that it took to get all the paperwork through so that we could get them over the border. And then they filed an asylum claim in San Diego. They moved out with family to South Carolina, and their asylum claim was considered valid. And they're now American citizens. She had the baby's healthy, and they're contributing members of society and lawful.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 301. I'm talking to Alec Egizi. I first met this man when he was interning at the Foundation for Economic Education years ago at that wonderful old fee mansion. And he's a lawyer in Colorado now. And we're going to talk about immigration law and immigration cases and just what's been going on with, Americans and immigrants and U.S. policy toward the immigrants. How are you, Alec?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
Alec, I got to ask you one thing before we get into the main topic. When was the last time you were at the Fee Mansion?
Oh, goodness. I don't think I was there again after I left. I think I left, 1998?
Yeah, I love that place. It was just a beautiful building. They moved out in 2014 and everything is there again. So now you're doing, different types of law, but one of your fields is immigration law. How long have you been doing immigration law?
I was a public defender for 10 years out here. So, when I left Fee, I did banking for a short period of time, finance personal loans. And then I decided I hated that. And my wife and I decided there was this new thing called the internet. And so we're like, well, let's go be teachers in Colorado. And so, we joined a charter school out here, and she taught English and I taught history. And I did that for 5 years, and then I decided to go to law school. And when I went to law school, I thought, I don't want to help people anymore. I want to do tax law and help rich people not pay their taxes. So I studied a bunch of tax law, and then I realized, I'm going to be miserable. So I ended up getting a job as a public defender here out in the Colorado system, which is actually kind of a difficult job to get. I had to have a Supreme Court justice out here um, vouch for me to get the job because I'd taken so many tax classes. And so I did that for 10 years. And then when I left the public defender's office, I decided to branch out and do more than just criminal law. So the first thing I did was I got a job doing dependency and neglect law, custody issues, child custody issues, where the government comes in and takes somebody's child, and then the parents have to jump through a bunch of hoops to get their kid back. But I went to an immigration training, I'd say about, maybe, it's been a while now. Right at the beginning of the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, I went to immigration training because I wanted to help with immigration law. And in that training, I was kind of shocked to hear, what kind of happens in that world. So I decided to start doing some volunteer work in that area.
Pro bono legal work. Yeah, you're a noble man. Of course, public defenders don't get paid that much either, though, do they?
No, and we were on a budget freeze too, so I was underpaid even for a public defender for many years. I have worked my butt off and don't have a lot of money to show for it, but I'm comfortable.
Yeah, Janine, I had Janine Eunice. She said she made $50,000 as a public defender in New York City, too.
Wow, I haven't thought about Eugene Eunice in a while. Yeah, I made, I think by the end of after 10 years, I was making around 80,000 here, 88.
Well, it's very important work. I don't know that many people who stick that long with being public defenders just because of it, but.
Well, it was because of the cause, Chris, right? It's when, in terms of, due process and government power and constitutional rights, criminal law is where the rubber hits the road. You are standing up for the Constitution every day, and it's the only thing that prevents tyranny. And it barely does that. It's like keeping a wave off the sand.
That's exactly. Yeah, I've long believed, we can live without voting, but we will not survive without due process.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's absolutely critical. And, it took a while to get it in terms of history.
Yeah. So what shocked you about the whole immigration system? What were the first things you saw that surprised you? And this was obviously 2017, which was, in Trump's first term.
Yep. Well, it was one of the lectures there. They talked about, and I specialized in juvenile delinquency law at the public defender's office because they just ran roughshod over those kids' rights and nobody cared. So, I was particularly interested in minors who independently cross the border and are here. And so you will have in an immigration court a 6-year-old child who is not entitled to counsel, not even entitled to a guardian ad litem. A guardian ad litem represents the best interest of children and speaks for children when they're too young to really be competent to understand the proceedings. They're not entitled to one of those. And they're in front of an immigration judge, which is an administrative law judge. This is essentially like a traffic court judge. They don't necessarily know what they're doing. And you can see videos of these little kids, and they may have fled from someplace like Guatemala or El Salvador, where there's terrible gang violence, and their parents used their, meager resources to get the child across the border for an asylum claim. And the child is standing there alone in the courtroom that's 6 years old. And if they lose the hearing, they might have to go back to El Salvador and potentially face death or kidnapping or trafficking. So it's a death penalty case in front of a traffic court judge without due process, or without the right to a lawyer. And that was horrifying to me. And so, rather than, I used to watch the news and just get upset. And that didn't do anything for me. It didn't do anything to change anything. So I figured, hey, I'm a lawyer. And so I just got on Facebook and I said, hey, I'm going to go down to Tijuana and try to get some people across the border. And my goal was, I like we were talking before we started recording here, that you can't have necessarily open immigration or free immigration. That's probably not workable, right? Especially in a social welfare state. But there is a law about asylum, and people can make claims, and they have a right to be in front of a court and hopefully be represented. If they have a valid claim, then they should have their day in court. So I got together a group. I just said, hey, if anybody wants to donate to this, we're all doing it, pro bono. And I got together 5 lawyers and 2 social workers who were also fluent Spanish speakers. And we flew down to Tijuana and worked with this group called Al Otro Lado, which is Spanish for another place. A wonderful group. The lady who runs this, a beautiful woman, a Harvard graduate, lives in, squalor in Tijuana. Tijuana is not a pretty place. And just works 18-hour days trying to get due process for asylum claimants. And it was an amazing experience. It was exhausting, but it was amazing and scary.
Yeah, I can imagine. So you mentioned, are these kids, obviously a kid doesn't go from a 6-year-old isn't going from El Salvador to the U.S. all by himself. I mean, how do they get there? Do the parents drop them off the border, or what exactly is going on here?
Well, I mean, yeah, there are various ways. You could have a relative or somebody drop them off because the relative can't get in.
Okay.
Or, and there are, there are people who you can pay to get somebody across the border. They call them coyotes.
Yeah, coyotes. Yeah. So I mean, I don't know. It seems like you're putting your kid in danger though if you separate from them. I mean,
I think that they're desperately worried for their child's safety in their home country, and they don't have the resources to get themselves across the border. So they try to save their child.
So literally you have, and I think a lot of immigrants are that way, and they maybe have this attitude: I'm never going to make it, but maybe my kids will make it.
Yeah.
I mean, they're content with working out in the, picking berries in the fields, but maybe my kid will be a lawyer.
Right.
And
they might have a contact or somebody in, in the States, and they just try to get their kid to that relative or somebody who has, status in the United States.
I mean, I absolutely think it's horrible, when we have these forceful separations, but I just can't for the life of me understand why that it just kind of shocks me that they would just send their kids. I guess it's almost like, some parents would send their Jewish kids out of Germany, even though they couldn't get out maybe.
Right.
But
if you think about El Salvador, right, or Guatemala, you got MS-13 down there.
Yeah, well, El Salvador has gotten a lot better, but yes, I understand that there are, and that's one thing. I was talking to Axel Kaiser in Chile a few days ago, and there are some of these people are worried about, they want to use immigration law really to keep out criminals. And my perspective when I talk to him seemed different because I have to admit, Alec, I don't trust the motives of the anti-immigration crowd in America, and I probably do trust the motives of them in some other countries.
Because I think that there are probably some criminals who come over the border.
Oh yes, they're always.
But I think, also if the big gangs, they run things down in South America. So why would they come up here? Well, I mean, I'm not saying that nobody would come up here, but I'm saying that, their chances of having the kind of power that they have up here are significantly less than the kind of power they can have down there. Whereas the people who are coming here for asylum or economic reasons, and you can't come here for economic reasons without going through the immigration process.
Yes.
But
there are other ways to do that.
And George W. Bush said it a long time ago. I think even HW said it. That we need immigrants. We need their labor. They're willing to come here. They're willing to work hard. They're generally intact families. They're religious. They're law-abiding. And the answer to that is a more liberal visa system, rather than having everybody, under the radar and their life, having to live, this shadow life. But we haven't gotten there yet. And I think the Republican Party under the Bushes was really trying to get the Hispanic vote through immigration reform, which I thought was a smart strategy for them, because in so many ways that lines up with the social conservatism of the Republican Party.
That's the wild thing here. And, you're talking about culture. I mean, I think America is totally, I think America is like a dog that's blind, deaf. It has cancer and and you just found out it has a broken leg. What do you do when your dog's like that? You put him to sleep. But
right.
I think America is that bad, and largely because of that whole attitude toward families now. I mean, I talk to men, now who said, I married a woman from Colombia, or I married a Mexican woman, and they're just like, oh, she's wonderful. It's compare. I mean, we'll let all the American women be boss babes and go on antidepressants and have 5 cats, and we can then import women from South America to be wives and mothers.
That's a whole. I'd be happy to talk to you about that for a while, and that dovetails a lot with a lot of the problems that I see in the dependency and neglect world.
Yeah,
I just think that these later waves of feminism have really been done an injustice to women and to families in general.
But that's another topic, and I want to stick on immigration for right now. But this is what's so interesting, though. I know Reagan was very popular with immigrants, and now the red team and I don't blame Trump as much as I blame the base. I really blame the base here. This anti-immigrant stuff is popular. I mean, look how much I see it on Twitter. And one person, he said, we the people sent him home. That those were his words. We the people. It's like, and this is literally a case of a political party throwing away a vote, or just basically going to a group of voters and saying, we hate you.
Right.
And then they're scratching their heads. Well, why won't, they're voting for the other party. Well, of course they are.
Right. Well, it's very interesting to me. I think when, I saw Trump's immigration policies, the first person I thought of was Ross Perot.
Yeah.
And it seemed to me that almost his entire platform was simply anti-immigration. And, the giant sucking sound of jobs leaving America.
Well, that was more anti-free trade.
I guess you're right.
I would probably put the blame more on Pat Buchanan.
Interesting.
Well, if you remember,
Did
he
you ever
ran.
see that Saturday Night Live send up of the McLaughlin group?
Yeah. Well, if you remember, he ran against Bush in '92 and got, and people were pretty sure it was going nowhere, but he got over 30% in the New Hampshire primary, and they
Yeah.
let him have that speech at the convention. And I remember people calling it out. I mean, that guy's always been a bigot. I scratch my head when and that's not to say he doesn't have some really good insights on some things, but every time I would see him on have an article on the Mises Institute website, I would just scratch my head. It's like, how can you think this guy is on your side? It's, and not to mention he worked for Nixon.
Right. So, but the reason I thought about Ross Perot was, that was the election between H.W., Perot, and Clinton.
Clinton, yes.
And he got almost a third of the vote.
Yes, he did.
He dropped out and had to get back in.
He got 19 million when it came out to it, and it was about. It was funny. The millions were about this. It was about 100 million total votes. So he got about 19. He got 19% of the vote, no electoral votes.
And he had that kerfluffle where he was doing better, and he left the campaign, and then he came back, and then everybody's like, "We can't trust this guy." But what stuck in my mind there is like you can probably get about a third of the American vote for just being anti-immigrant.
Oh yes,
and
at least.
The other thing that was notable to me was when Trump was running, I was still married at the time. And I went up, she lives in rural Michigan. My wife lived in my ex-wife lived in rural Michigan.
Yes.
And Ionia, it's a prison town. And her dad was a prison guard and her mom was a librarian. They've been lifelong Democrats. Union Democrats.
Oh, yes.
But deep down, they were racist. And they also hated immigration because they didn't like the competition of jobs, right? It's like the South Park bit. They took our jobs. And they flipped. They became Trump voters because of the immigration stuff. Lifelong Democrats, blue state, and those Rust Belt states flipped. And there was a realignment.
I definitely, being from the Northern Panhandle of West Virginia, I mean, I graduated high school and we had about 420 in our graduating class. And now the graduating classes are down to about 250. I still don't think everybody there is a racist, but there's definitely this attitude there that that they say that they feel like they've really been neglected and just not that they've not really. And I understand that feeling. And Trump kind of said to them, "I'm not going to neglect you." It's, when you watch so many people leave, it's just hard to.
And it's fair. It's fair to sympathize, I think, with the working class, especially because we have a social welfare system, right? And they are depending on those resources, and they are competing for jobs, and it's easier for the middle class or the upper class to say, "Oh no, we should be more generous and let people in," because they're not threatened by these people. I don't truly think that the working class is threatened by too much competition, but it's not to say that if you have too many people coming in, that it doesn't put a strain on the system. So we were a sanctuary city. Denver was a sanctuary city here, and we had a lot of Venezuelans come in. And for a while, it was difficult for me to get my clients housing, because housing is in short supply in Colorado anyway, because it's extremely expensive to live out here.
Yeah.
You know, they're just more people came in, and so there were fewer housing resources. On the other hand, when I was a criminal defender, I had a young lady. She was 19, and she wanted to work, and so she purchased a Social Security number that she thought would work, and it turns out that it was somebody else's Social Security number. She worked at Wendy's. She paid Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, income tax, and received no benefits because she didn't want to take them, for fear of, immigration consequences. And then when the white person who had the Social Security number tried to claim benefits, they're like, "Oh no, you can't because you're working." And they charged, my client, like this 19-year-old client who was doing nothing more than working at Wendy's.
Yes.
With felony criminal impersonation. He was charged with
Yeah.
a felony for working at Wendy's, for making burgers. And to me, that seems really wrong.
I've heard stories like that of people, cashing each other's paychecks and stuff like that to get around this. Yeah, Alec, one question I've got to ask too is, let's imagine if Samantha Stevens waved her magic wand and all of the welfare state disappeared, all of the freebies disappeared, all of the government payments to organizations like Catholic Charities disappeared,
right?
And also another key fact here too is the laws requiring hospitals to treat people. All of this stuff disappears. How would that impact immigration? Would we see less of them?
It's hard to say. I think people are coming here. I don't think they're coming here to be on welfare. I think they're coming here to work. The vast majority of them. Now
also includes the schools. Yeah,
the schools do, right?
Yeah.
I think you would see less immigration, for sure, right? I mean, if you're subsidizing something, you get more of it. That's why we have so many families with no fathers, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, we remember the propositions in California that got voted yes, and then of course the ACLU sues them to get rid of that proposition. The proposition that say we're not going to give payments to immigrants anymore. We're not going to give free stuff to immigrants anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if that's a solution, right? The problem is, I used to, I've tempered my libertarianism a bit.
Yeah.
Right. You have to be realistic.
Well, I figured you're not. One reason why I brought you on here is there's so many that, so many of the pro-immigration people are just so woke that they're nuts. I wanted to bring on something that I figured would be
well,
sane.
I'm still fairly libertarian.
Yeah.
But working as a public defender, what I started to realize is there's a whole section of society that's completely incapable of self-governance. And there's one of two things you can do with these people. You can throw them in prison, or you can try to give them inner resources so that they can take care of themselves. And between the two of those choices, therapy, housing, things like that, that's cheaper and more humane. But there's just a lot of people out there that, they can't take care of themselves.
Yeah. So anyway,
and it's not viable. It's not viable politically to say, well, we should just let them rot.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. So that was what I was wondering about though too. And we often hear this line, we can't have open borders as long as we have a welfare state. And I don't think those screams are sincere. I actually think conservatives keep the welfare state alive because it gives them excuses for policies that they favor, like closing the border and keeping drugs illegal.
Well, that's an interesting take on it, Chris. Yeah, that's sort of the reverse way. That sort of flips it. I like that.
Well, we got the New Deal, after those immigration acts were passed by during Coolidge's years. And if they suddenly shut down the border, I wouldn't be surprised if they expanded the welfare state even more. They'd use that. Well, we don't have immigrants now. We can, have more programs.
Right. It's a possibility.
Yeah, but this brings up another issue too, Alec. How many people would want to leave these countries for crime if we legalized all the drugs?
Well, I think that's a really good point, right? I mean, Portugal has had tremendous success with decriminalization a long time ago. I mean, I think we're slowly getting there. Colorado spearheaded marijuana decriminalization. We weren't the first, but we started a lot of other people after us, and everything was fine. And what happened was what the libertarians said would happen. Marijuana use went down amongst youth. It wasn't cool anymore.
It wasn't cool anymore, and now they go to shops where they ask for ID.
Right.
When it's illegal, they don't ask for ID.
Yeah. And it's why would people bother selling it on the black market anymore? There's the competition has driven prices down, that there's no profit in it. And now we've decriminalized psilocybin, although that's starting pretty slow. But I mean, really, if you've got drug problems, just you have a place where people can go and use, and then you offer them treatment if they want it. And that sort of policy is infinitely better and bankrupts these incredibly rich and powerful and dangerous, murderous gangs that have caused huge political problems in South America. And South America has huge potential.
Oh, I think it does have huge potential, and even in just south of the border in Mexico. Yes, and then you hear Vivek talk about he wanting to send the military in. So it'll end up being. I mean, I've said if they do that, I'll go fight for Mexico. I'm not going to tolerate my country invading Mexico. There's no way.
No, we've already done that once.
Yeah, and I mean, not to mention just our own interference in these countries. I mean, I don't think we have that many Portuguese people who want to come here, but certainly we've got people in the Western Hemisphere. Mexico, and I mean, and how many times have we interfered in Haiti, for goodness sakes? Oh, geez.
Right, and and you have to give some credit. These are often arguments that are made by the left, that American interventionism has caused the instability that is going on in South America. And I can get on board with that. Those are challenging arguments for me because I agree.
Yes.
Right. However, it also just, when lefties say stuff like, it's not my fault, it gets to be a little much. I mean, these places were established by, colonialist countries that were not like the colonialists, like the English, right? The Spanish were totalitarians.
Yeah, there was definitely a type of feudalism that they established, which is why if you look at how they've done, I mean, if you look at all the countries that were colonized by Britain, most of them are doing pretty well. At least they're doing better than other former colonies. Yeah, they're doing better than the countries that were colonized by the French or by the Belgians or by whoever.
And I think that's not a coincidence.
Yeah, and I definitely, one thing though, where I often ask myself too, people talk about, you want to save Western civilization. I do think though that because, these people are children of the Roman Empire, they are part of Western civilization, because I think we agree that the Roman Empire is an early form of Western civilization.
Right. So, you mean the Spanish?
Yeah, the Spanish speakers. Children of the Roman Empire, descendants, because
yes.
Spain was part of Rome, and they still speak that a language that's a derivative of Latin. And
no, I absolutely agree, and I think Western civilization has many virtues.
Yes, definitely. I definitely want to, and we want to keep the things that are good, and I often laugh when I hear these anti-immigrant people talk about preserving the culture. I said, what culture? We don't care. We don't have a culture here anymore. We don't care about the Bill of Rights here anymore.
Right. You know what, Chris? Nobody cares about the Bill of Rights until they're in a jury. And when they're sitting there in a jury and you come in with your client who's accused of crime, they glare at me for representing an accused, and they glare at the accused. And it takes me about 10 minutes of jury selection to make them feel like at any moment, for any reason, they could be sitting next to me behind my desk in front of a jury. And they get very protective of the Constitution at that point.
Oh, that's great. I'd love to know what you do. That's wild.
Well, they'll just say they take proof beyond a reasonable doubt very seriously.
Because so many people in America have this attitude: it will never happen to me, or it will never happen here. And
no, that's part of it too. Being here in Boulder County, many of my friends are liberal. Some of them very liberal. Colorado is kind of a schizophrenic state, right? Because you have a place like Colorado Springs, which is extremely conservative. You've got the Air Force Academy down there, and you've got mega churches all over the place, evangelicals and military. And then you get a place like Boulder, where if you might get arrested if you don't have a dream catcher hanging up in your house. You know what I mean? Like, it's very liberal. And what gets me is that my liberal friends, they freak out whenever there's a Republican in office. Doesn't matter who the Republican is, but they freak out, especially about Trump, which is not completely unjustified. The man's a lacks character,
overgrown frat boy, and as I like to call him,
unpredictable and unfit.
He's getting more so, and not to mention, the thing that puzzles me too, I think he's probably the most unchristian president we've had in 100 years, and yet Christians love him.
Yeah. Well, when he was thinking about running for president, he called in a Republican strategist because he decided he wanted to run as a Republican, famously saying, because they're stupid.
I've heard some people said that's not true, but I definitely agree with the spirit of it. Yeah.
Well, the strategist came in and said, you can't run as a Republican. And he's like, why not? He's like, because you're not a Republican. He's like, yes, I am. And he's like, you donated 80% of the charities that you donated to were pro-choice. And he's like, well, you're a real estate guy in New York. Yeah. You have to cozy up with the Democrats in New York. That's what you got to do. But no, I'm a Republican. It's all a facade for him. It's not about policy. It's about power and ego.
My
point is that liberals are like, everything's falling apart. America's falling apart right now. and the rule of law is going away. And just teaching American history, I was like, look, here's the story of America. You had a bunch of Enlightenment geniuses who studied all of history and sat down and tried to develop a country, or a blueprint for limited government that would not allow this to happen. Then everybody started ignoring that blueprint, and the New Deal came along, and it was downhill from there, people. And this has happened over and over and over and over again throughout history. And if you're thinking this is just happening now, you haven't been paying attention for over 100 years.
I would, however, say that it probably started going downhill around the turn of the century. But yes, with the beginning, certainly Wilson and the conquest of socialism on the college campuses, which is when that started happening.
Yeah. Well, there's people when they're talking about free speech, for example, will quote the Supreme Court line. You can't shout fire in a crowded auditorium. Like, that's the limit in free speech. But the case that comes from isn't about shouting fire in a crowded auditorium. It's about protesting World War I.
Yes.
And it's okay. It's okay to arrest people for protesting a war.
Well, the other thing too is that was, the whole shouting fire in a movie theater thing is just that you're violating a contract. You buy a ticket to a movie, and you agree to behave in a certain way. And when you're removed from the movie, and when you shout fire, you're violating that contract. Because you're going in there to respect, other moviegoers. Now, certainly,
and I accept that too. But what I'm saying is,
of course, if
that's a sign of the federal government ratcheting back our guaranteed constitutional rights, right? And they're doing it because they want to propagate a war, which of course gives them more opportunity to take away more rights.
Yeah, and that's another thing we're seeing here too now, Alec, is we're also seeing people protesting on college campuses, and in some cases they have visas, and in one particular case, a lady at Tufts, a Turkish lady at Tufts, wrote an article or signed an article, and then suddenly it says, "Oh, we're taking your visa away."
Yeah. Yeah, no, some of the stuff that's happening is kind of scary.
Yes.
With Colorado, at least, there seems to be quite a bit of back and forth now between the states and the feds.
Yeah.
The Colorado is Democrat controlled, and they passed a law just a few weeks ago that said no government official, no peace officer in the state of Colorado shall ever inform ICE of somebody's status, even if there's a warrant out for immigration violation.
Yeah, I mean, I hope this still applies to immigrants who commit real crimes, but it's.
Well, immigrants who commit real crimes, that's different.
Yeah.
Right? If they get remanded, right?
Yes,
and there are certain crimes, when you say real crimes, right? There are crimes that who cares?
Shoplifting, right? Bank robbery.
Now, shoplifting will actually get you. That is a crime of moral turpitude.
Yes, exactly. Right? Bank robbery, rape. Driving while intoxicated that results in an injury.
Violence.
Yeah.
But destruction of property or something like that, if it's not domestic violence related.
Yes.
Even assaults sometimes, if somebody gets in a fight at a bar or something like that.
Does it?
Um,
I suspect though, if they're both immigrants, I suspect that domestic violence never gets reported, or does it?
well, you underestimate the naivete of people, but yeah, in
Yes.
general, immigrants are trying to keep a low profile.
Yes.
But yeah, no, it does get reported all the time. The dynamic is a very, masculine, feminine dynamic sometimes
Yeah.
in DV cases where they're both sort of fighting with each other. And the woman, and this is generalization, of course, not true in all cases. Guys could do this stuff too. Will get angry and call the cops just because they want him arrested for the night. They want him to have a bad night, and then she cools off the next day, and then there's a mandatory protection order in place, and so he can't move back in with her, and then she can't pay the rent, and then he gets held by ICE, and then he gets deported, and everybody's life is absolutely ruined. When really it was sort of the kind of argument that you would have if you were in, if you were in grade school and you're like, teacher, he did this to me.
Does the toilet paper go over or under?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And then she's like, yeah, he pushed me. And again, this is another conversation, but part of the result of feminism past the 90s was changing domestic violence laws to take away all discretion from all government employees, so that there's mandatory arrest, mandatory protection orders that are instituted. DA is not allowed to dismiss the case unless they can get up there and say there's no way they could prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And it's a disaster for these families.
Well,
absolute disaster.
We're going off on tangents again, but yes.
No, I know. I'm sorry, but it's informing the rest of it.
But yeah, we'll have to use this for another show. But so we have this situation too, though, and you were talking to me about some of these torture tactics that happen with immigrants, like they put them into these deep freezes, which is, I can't think of this being done anywhere else other than Siberia. And of course, at least in Siberia, they were doing it in places that are naturally that way. Here we're actually, building these freezers to freeze immigrants. Is that right? What can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So I got two cases that I'd like to tell you about down in Tijuana. Yeah. One was a couple that was fleeing from El Salvador. And the other one was this 14-year-old boy. So this 14-year-old had been brought with, similar to what we're talking with an aunt up from Guatemala, if I believe, and needed to get across the border because his family was being threatened by local gangs. And they said, we're going to kill your child. So they sent the child away, and he got up walking, essentially, or hitchhiking all the way up through Mexico. And the other thing to keep in mind is that people in Mexico do not like people from other countries coming into Mexico to try to get to America. So they face discrimination in that regard.
There's a lot of prejudice among the Spanish speakers, period. Mexicans and Cubans don't really like each other either.
Well, and who's especially discriminated against are the native speakers of the South American Indian languages.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
They hate them.
I've been to Peru. I know how divided Peru is.
It's really sad. So anyway, this boy gets up here, and he's just a little. In Italian, we call them polpette, little meatball. And we're trying to get him across the border. And you meet up with Border Patrol there, and these are some of the most overtly racist people I've ever met. I mean, I was actually shocked that they didn't even pretend. And they kind of refused us at the border, and then we filed asylum claims and got a court order, and finally were able to get him to the border. And we met with the same person again, and he looked at the court order and knew he couldn't do anything about it. And so he's like, fine, we'll let him in, but we're going to put him in the fridge for 3 days. Have fun, kid. And the fridge, I forget the Spanish word for it, but all of the immigrants knew about it, is this holding cell that you have to stay in for at least 3 days before you can be released to go to your court date in San Diego from Tijuana. And they keep it intentionally very, very cold, like 50 degrees or below. And, people are coming here. They're walking up through South America in T-shirts and shorts. They don't have clothing. They're desperately poor. So it's not like they have jackets or anything. And they give them these, the aluminum blankets that you see every once in a while.
Aluminum blankets?
You ever seen those? They're
I haven't seen those. The Spanish word for refrigerator is just refrigerador. It's just changing the T to a D.
Yeah, I think that's what they called it.
Yeah.
And so it's a metallic like blanket. It's very thin. And they just wrap themselves in that and shiver for 3 days. And they do it on purpose. They do it on purpose just to be nasty, just to be cruel. It's extremely un-American, inhumane, and shameful. It's shameful for our country to do that.
It sounds like, it almost sounds like, as I said, are these people who are too sadistic to be police officers, or,
Right.
Alec, I really
laughing at a 14-year-old boy who made a life-risking perilous journey by foot.
Yeah, that's one thing.
Hundreds or thousands of miles, and then torturing him and laughing about it. What is wrong with you, sir?
That's one thing that kind of gets me, is a lot of these immigrants really have. I mean, there's such a toughness that's involved in doing this at all. Yeah. I mean, think about the effort that, for example, maybe goes into climbing something like Mount Everest, but instead you're figuring out a way to get 1,000 miles. It's kind of remarkable. I mean, this is something that most Americans would never be able to do.
I mean, I find it an effort to go to the grocery store some days, like, God, it's like 4 miles from here.
Yeah, you're probably camping out, maybe sleeping on the ground and all this stuff. I mean, these people are the equivalent of, of Lewis and Clark or something. Well, in a way, they're not going over undocumented land. I mean, they may have maps, but.
Which is exactly why we want people like that in our country.
Yeah, we really do. And in fact, really they're self-selecting. I mean, they're really, it takes a lot of courage and a lot of resourcefulness. I mean, this 14-year-old boy is probably more mature than a lot of 25-year-olds.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I used to joke that I have an entire list of natives that I'd be happy to deport because they don't have those sorts of values.
Oh, I know. They're so.
They love the Kardashians.
And sometimes I wonder if that's part of the issue here. It's just because these people are, willing to work. They're willing to work harder.
Yeah.
Not to mention, you hear stories about, kids who have, like these kids will start doing construction work and something in Mexico when they're 10 years old. And so if they show up here at the age of 19, they've already got experience,
Right.
It is interesting too. I did want to point out Cesar Chavez was actually somewhat anti-immigrant.
Yeah.
Yeah. He advocated for a lot of Mexican Americans. And I know also I hear that sometimes various groups will you know, the Venezuelans will support something because it hurts the Cubans, or the Dominicans will support something because it hurts the Colombians, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah, Latin American is definitely not as monolithic as it's presented. You know,
Yeah, it's definitely not. I mean, they all speak the same language, but yeah, it's not as monolithic. I mean, I would advise Venezuelan immigrants. I'd just say go to Argentina. Milei loves you, and they love him.
right.
And there's no language barrier there.
So the other thing I wanted to tell you about was this other couple that we had. And I mentioned before, I think they were fleeing MS-13 in El Salvador. Beautiful young couple. I would say they're early 20s, 22, 23. And the mother was pregnant. And they had a court date. They had a court date in San Diego. So they'd already, gone through the asylum paperwork, but the Border Patrol wouldn't let them through. And they wouldn't let them through because they could tell that she was like 8 months pregnant, right? She was showing a lot. And so they didn't want her to be able to have a baby on the other side of the border. So they just simply refused to let her in, even though she was legally authorized to go through. And it took us calling up the chain of command saying, look, we've got a court order to let her through. And standing at midnight outside the border, shouting at Border Patrol until they finally let them through. And then again, they go to the refrigerator, even though she's 8 months pregnant. Now, these people, when they were fleeing El Salvador, were being chased by gangs.
Yes.
And then when they got to Mexico, they were still being called and threatened and demanding money from them, or the gangs were going to come and kill them. So we had to, and normally you're not supposed to like give gifts or something like that to your clients, but fuck that, right here. We hid them in a hotel for the day or two that it took to get all the paperwork through so that we could get them over the border. And then they filed an asylum claim in San Diego. They moved out with family to South Carolina, and their asylum claim was considered valid. And they're now American citizens. She had the baby's healthy, and they're contributing members of society and lawful.
And they wanted to do something that might very well have killed the baby.
You mean fleeing?
Well, no, if they'd put them in this refrigerator.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, like that's how callous they were. I mean, astonishing.
Alec, I really wonder sometimes, are people just mean anytime they know that they can get away with it?
Well, it depends on the person, right?
And
to me, that's not who I am. Right?
Yeah.
But if you think of, the movie Heathers?
Yeah, I know the movie Heathers, definitely.
Okay. Well, Winona Ryder is talking to the lead Heather.
Yeah.
And she's like, why are you such a bitch, Heather? And Heather says, because I can be.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think certain people, I think especially if you've adopted a certain nihilism, you just think that it's all about power. And this is part of the problem with the left too, right? Is that it's rather obsessed with power. Like if you read continental philosophy,
yes.
They think that it's the primary or only driving force in human relations. I think that's ridiculous.
Alec, I stumbled onto this tweet yesterday, and this guy's not necessarily talking about politics, but he's just coming up with this story about how when I was in kindergarten, a little girl came into the classroom about a week after the year started.
Mm-hmm.
And this girl was Mennonite, and she only knew German.
Mm-hmm.
He said that because he had some grandparents who had been teaching him German, he would go up and try to speak to her. And he's talking about this, though, too. But he immediately talks about how the other kids were quite mean to her. And they even teased her for not speaking English and even tried to get her to eat paint and glue. And these are 6-year-olds.
Yeah.
I mean, all because this girl doesn't speak English and speaks German in a kindergarten class.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I think there's a
yeah.
Lord of the Flies aspect to the
Yeah.
human nature.
Well, yeah, and the other thing too is he writes about how he didn't encounter her again until they were both 16, and this girl wanted him when they were both 16 because she still remembered that.
Oh.
I mean, she's and Mennonites, you have to go to your parents, but she says, I want to go talk to that boy. And it sounds like to me also she told her parents about what happened. So they knew the story. So they already knew, hey, this is a good boy, but they didn't get married is kind of the sad part. But, this is just so wild that I think that from 6-year-olds in a kindergarten class,
right.
Making fun of a girl because she speaks German and doesn't speak English.
This is my thought about it. Right? If you're a sadist, you will be attracted to positions or jobs in which you can be sadistic.
Yes.
Right. Part of the problem with, like teaching, right? If you're a pedophile, you might want to teach in an elementary school.
I hate thinking about that, but there's some truth to it. When I see people, that's why I always say, if you want your kids to have a coach or something, find a coach who's really passionate about what he's teaching. I mean, football coaches don't coach football because they want to, well, they might like kids, but they coach football because they love football. I had a swim coach who coached swimming because he loved swimming, so. But yeah, I often wonder when, says, I just want to be a teacher because I want to help kids. I'm actually kind of suspicious of that anymore.
Well, I mean, there's no way to get around it. I mean, the vast majority of teachers, of course, just love children.
Yeah, I think they do. And I think they really do.
But you've got to keep an eye out for it.
Yeah.
And in government positions, you have power.
Oh, yes.
And so, the people who want to abuse that power are going to be attracted to those positions.
People who want to abuse power, yeah, and that's the same thing too. When you have a tax collector or when it's really sick. I get. It's not everybody, but we just have to figure out ways to keep the wrong people out of these jobs. And we've never heard. We hear certainly talks about police brutality. I do think there are a lot of good police officers out there, but we never hear about brutality coming from, say, other federal agents or stuff like that. And I can imagine, I can imagine too that there's probably a lot of rapes that happen that never get reported. Of course, we can't know for sure, but have you been told any stories of that? Like ICE agent assaulted me or something like that. Obviously, we can't mention names.
Yeah. So I mean, again, going back to, so my ex-wife's best friend was a nurse, and she was married to a SWAT member. And I remember going to a party with them, and it was me, the defense attorney.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
With 6 SWAT team members. And I think just to kind of rub it in, they just told stories about how they enjoyed beating the hell out of people they were arresting. And just laughing about it. When I reflect on that, I think about, what cop uniforms used to look like and what they look like now. And this might seem like a small point, but they used to be baby blue. And now they're black.
There's some truth to that.
Does that tell you something?
Maybe it does tell you something. There's also, I think that a lot of things have changed. I think the fact that police officers used to walk around the neighborhoods more, and now they're more closed up in their cars. There's certainly differences also between the small town police officer and the big city police officer, because in the small town, everybody knows who he is anyway.
Right.
But there's a lot of, and I think there are a lot of people who do go in because they have good intentions, but it's,
I was disappointed because I was raised in a very law and order kind of household, right? My family went to church. We went to church every week.
yes.
We followed the rules at school. We always did our homework and so forth. And we respected the police. And, I became skeptical about the efficacy of government, in late high school. And I went into the job as a public defender thinking, oh, this is a broken system. It took me 5 trials before I found a police officer who actually told the truth.
Oh, wow.
And I went up to him and I shook his hand after the trial and I said, I really appreciate you doing that because, I know there are good ones out there and you're trying to do the best you can. And I know that you're dealing with difficult people and I know it's got to be frustrating. And I know you're putting your life at risk. I get all of that. But, cops just thought it was a game to get up there and lie on the stand.
Yeah, I really don't know. When it should always be a trial should always be about the truth and not about winning. And obviously, hopefully the truth is on your side, but and you were a public defender too, though. I don't know. I mean, you probably had some people that you said, oh, this guy's such a scumbag. Why do I have to defend him? I know he's guilty. Did you have situations like that or,
Yeah, that's what we defense attorneys or especially public defenders would call the question.
Yeah.
Like you get that question all the time. I'd say very, very, very rarely. 95% of the time I'm cleaning somebody out. So I'm saying, yeah, they did it. They made a mistake, but you got to go easy on them because first of all, this is overcharge, or second of all, this is the kind of trauma they went through, or, the facts aren't exactly right about this. There's mitigating circumstances, or, they were drunk at the time, but now they've been sober for 6 months, and blah, 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 right? So you're not saying somebody's not guilty. You're saying they're guilty, but, you should have mercy. The 5% of the time where they're guilty, I'd say 95% of that time they're guilty, but they're getting screwed, right? They've done something bad and they're not getting a deal.
Yeah.
Right. They're getting locked away forever. The cops are lying. The DAs are withholding evidence, and they're not getting bond the way they should.
Yeah.
And they're cheating. They're cheating about it. And you stop thinking about as much about what your guy did as the fact that they're destroying justice.
Yeah. You might, the guy who steals a pack of cigarettes, you don't want him, you might want him to go to jail for a month, but you don't want him to go to jail for 10 years.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess
I'm just using that as an example, but I get it. Yeah.
So I mean, I could give you an example, and it's a little off topic though.
It is a little off topic. Yeah, it's interesting to see how. Well, it seems
so.
like
I'll tell you this. Okay, I just hired on an intern.
Oh.
I didn't. So she does some admin work for me. She wants to finish up her undergraduate degree and then go to law school. And she had asked me, and we've been friends for a couple of years.
Yes.
And so she asked me a year ago, like, she asked me that question, how could you defend somebody you know is guilty? And then I had a kid who allegedly fooled around with some of his cousins who were younger. And so he
What were
picked
the
up
age differences here?
significant, 14 and 6.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But he's still a juvenile.
He's still a juvenile.
Yeah.
He's the sweetest kid you ever met, and he's intelligent. He's from a really good family, and it's just a huge evangelical family. They all hung out together.
Huge age gap. I was just hoping it wasn't one of those cases where it was like a 19-year-old with a 17-year-old.
No. It's bad, right? Like he's guilty.
That's serious. Yeah.
He's guilty of sex assault on a child, right?
Yeah.
The question is, he's a little bit on the spectrum, and he's never had any therapy or anything like that. And his family is very protective of him, and his cousin's family, they don't want him charged with anything. But they have to. They're mandatory reporters.
Yes.
So they have to destroy people's lives here. And so my job is to come in there and mitigate that and say, no, you don't have to remove this 14-year-old boy from his excellent family. We just need to get him some therapy, so that he can do this. And she had never seen that before. So I brought her in on this case, and she had never seen what that was. And she's like, I really didn't understand at first what you meant by, yes, I can defend people who I know are guilty.
Yeah.
And now I see what that looks like.
Yeah. Okay.
But again, we might have to clip this, but still.
Did you ever have any immigrants that you really knew were badasses, and did you not defend them, or did you?
No, I don't think so. Let me think. I did have in a criminal context, I defended somebody who was dealing a lot of cocaine.
Okay, yeah.
But I didn't care. That part of libertarianism, I'm like, all right, whatever. Although they left me in the courtroom with a pile of it. It was like 50 kilos. Everybody left the courtroom, and there was this huge pile of cocaine. It was just
50 kilograms. How much is that worth?
How much is that worth? Just put it in my pocket. No.
Why would you even carry it in if it's that much? Because that's 110 pounds.
Yeah. Like, how much does a kilo go for?
About 2.2 pounds.
Yeah, and I think the street value typically is around like 80 to 100, so 100 times 1,000.
Yeah,
$1,000 just one brick that was just sitting there.
Yeah, it's not cheap.
Like, okay, nope. Get those evil thoughts out of your head.
And of course, anything like that gets confiscated immediately, I assume.
I mean, I'd just be like, oh.
Well,
just gonna go to my car, guys. See you in a little bit.
Something else I wanted to ask you too about, Alec, though. We seem to have this industry that profits from immigration, or at least the detention of immigrants. What's going on with that? Because it seems like the whole goal in America is not just to slam the door on them and tell them to go back, but they want to incarcerate. They want to incarcerate people. I mean, why? There was that guy who I think came from one of the countries, got the permission to come in. Mm-hmm. Showed up at the Houston airport, and they said, "Oh, you got tattoos, so we're going to take you into custody," after he'd been approved to come into the country.
Right.
I mean, are they just trying to entrap some of these immigrants so they can put them in jail and then have somebody make money? I mean, there are people profiting from the incarceration of immigrants, and I've got a real problem with that.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, I think you always have to, follow the money, since we were talking about Nixon before.
Yes, of course, follow the money.
Yeah, and I mean, when I was teaching government to my students, they always wanted to talk about policy. And I'm like, we're not talking about policy. We're talking about incentives, right? We're talking about,
Yes.
I tried to teach them political economics, game theory, things like that. It was like, what is the structure of a bureaucracy? What are its incentives? And if I can identify those, you can identify what it's going to do regardless of who's in office. Now, I think it's worse in a situation like this where the policy is erratic.
Yes.
So I don't think there's a lot of
president
guidance from up top about what people should be doing. And then when you have a rogue agent, they're not going to be held accountable. Again, I think we were on a way better track for this stuff during the Bushes, because the Bushes were like, look, we really have to, essentially legalize this just the way that we would legalize drugs, or we legalize guns, legalize abortion. The argument I made when I was teaching AP government to my 99% pro-life students, they wanted to say this is murder. And I was like, okay, we're not talking about that. What we're talking about is, do you think the government has the competence and power to successfully enforce a law that about 50% of people don't believe in? That's the problem you have with drugs. That's the problem you have with gun control. And that's the problem you have with immigration. You can't ban it. You can't. It's going to cause nothing but problems. Human trafficking, people jumping over the wall, people living under the radar, people not paying taxes, criminals coming in and exploiting the people who are vulnerable because they can't go to the police.
Yes.
There's certainly, everybody thinks of government as like it's the hand of God that's coming down and can cure any problem. It cannot.
Yep. Well, a lot of people on the right tend to see government as the fairy godmother who, makes presents for everybody, and then for the conservatives, government is this great protector who protects against all these boogeymen and other things that are just out there. It's like that.
Certain social problems can't be fixed.
Yeah.
It's certainly not by government. Maybe they can be fixed in other ways.
Yeah.
But certain things just can't be fixed. You're going to have, to quote the Gospels, the poor will be with us always.
They will be. And, there's also, and poor is relative, though. It's, I think we'll always have poor and rich, but we can at least shift the curve, so to speak.
Well, and of course we have. In many respects, the poor in America are far richer than the Sultan of Constantinople.
That's the thing. That's the other thing too. Though a lot of Americans have no idea what poverty really looks like. Go to Peru or a place like that, and you'll see what poverty really looks like. It's and finally,
did you know that the Sultan in 1535 didn't own a single TV?
He didn't.
How about
that? Did you also know that the life expectancy in these countries was something like 40?
Yeah. Well, I can feel that. My body's telling me I should have died at 40. So.
Or like when I was bitten by that dog and we never found him when I was the day after my 11th birthday. What would have happened? What could have happened, before Louis Pasteur invented his rabies vaccine?
Right.
Maybe not. So yes, I took the vaccine. I've got a problem too with this whole attitude that we need to pass laws to prevent crime. Do you know what the? I'm sorry to interrupt, but do you know what I just read this the other day. You know what the life expectancy was in Soviet Russia in the 50s? What?
57.
Oh wow. Yeah, I believe it. And of course, American life expectancy has actually been going down since 2014. But but they say we got to outlaw guns to prevent murder. Oh, we got to violate the rights of everybody else to prevent murder because we don't want these occasional murderous immigrants in. And I would not object at all to having some kind of quickie background check system at the border. It says, okay, well, we'll check you out. Or Michael Rechtenwald said, advocated for a system of sponsorship where somebody says, okay, if he does something, I will take responsibility.
Well, I just did that.
Yeah.
I had a client who, on other very minor traffic cases, her son fell in love with a girl from Cambodia, and she came over, and her visa was about to expire, and she was allowed to stay as long as she had a sponsor. And so I asked my paralegal, who's just the biggest bleeding heart you've ever met, if she'd be willing to sponsor this girl, because I didn't think it would be appropriate for me to do it. And she did. So, and then ICE raided her. I just forgot about this. ICE raided her workplace and rounded up everybody, and she ran. And is now in a safe house, even though she's legally compliant. She had to run for money.
Well, you also recently had this case where some German girls, teenagers, 19 and 18, arrived in Honolulu and were going to go to California and Costa Rica, but they were then turned away because they didn't have hotel reservations. I can tell you from experience that will. Almost every time I've entered a country, they've always asked me, where are you staying? And I usually just tell them where my Airbnb is. When I was driving into Canada back in 2000, and this was when you could enter Canada. You could enter Canada without even a passport back then. Mm-hmm. But I almost didn't get in because, I was driving my car and I was just going to figure out where I was going to stay, which you definitely can do. But boy, they let me in, but boy, that was kind of the closest I ever felt like I came into not getting into a country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that's, and you're not used to that as an American, right?
Not really, and I wasn't expecting that in Canada.
You know who is used to it?
Lots of other people.
Everybody else on Earth.
I've never really had much that was and this was before the World Trade Center.
Yeah.
A year before that happened. It was, and I've known from experience though, I would often just drive, until I felt like it was time to stop, and then I'd look for a hotel. And most of the time you can do that. You do have to be careful, but it's and it was funny. Just, I couldn't enter Canada just for that reason alone. I think also sometimes just traveling alone as a single guy, but I don't know what they had.
Oh, I love traveling alone. That was when I quit the public defender's office. I hadn't taken a vacation in like 5 years. And so I had 2 months of full pay coming to me in PTO.
Oh, yes.
So I went to Europe and I just traveled, and I went to 22 countries, I think.
Oh, great. Yes.
Just, traveling alone,
yeah,
seeing the sights, meeting people. And I got as far as Tbilisi, Georgia.
Oh, I love that town.
Ah, beautiful, beautiful city.
Beautiful place. Yes.
But what struck me were, they're very pro-American. They had like American flags flying.
They're about as pro-American as any. When was this? They're about as pro-American as anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, this was, again, like 2018, 2019, right after the invasion.
When I was there in 2022, there were Ukrainian flags everywhere. They hate the Russians so much.
Yeah, they fucking hate the Russians, right? So anyway, I was there and I saw a billboard that said, "Win the lottery get a visa to the United States with a woman's face on it.
There was a lottery for that. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're just like, that tells you something about immigration too.
Yeah. That's really a great, yeah, Alec, that was the only time I went to a libertarian event where it might've been 50-50 or even more women than men. It seemed like, it really felt like this little country where they were obviously modern. They were, you saw signs for Bitcoin and stuff, but there was still very much, but it was still also seemed to have the good aspects of the 1950s, but a modern country. And I thought and I know Andrew Henderson, who runs that Nomad Capitals YouTube channel. He loves it too. Yeah. It's not easy to get there though. But yeah, that's definitely a place worth visiting. And of course, another thing too, I know a lady, I think she's still living in Mexico illegally because she fled the U.S. on marijuana charges. I mean, that's the thing. Yeah. Okay. Well, you got to so it has been great having you on here, Alec. I mean, maybe we'll talk about this again. We did go a little off topic. We got some good stories.
Well, yeah, and I hope you can clip it and put it together and it works. And if you need to do something, let me know.
Oh, we got a clean recording. I'm not going to complain. After we've worked out the right system. Anyway, where can people find you out there on the internet?
Well, you can get me at. Let's see here. If you Google Egizi and Associates.
Yes.
You
got your name on the law firm. You're important.
It's my law firm. It'll say it's not a private site because I have to update my.
Well, it's never just it's always Egizi. It's always somebody in Associates. It's never just you. It makes it a little more important.
Well, they're not technically law associates at this point. That's aspirational.
Yes.
But it might give you a warning if you go on it because I have to, I think, pay my domain or something.
No domains are cheap though, but yes.
Anyway, Egizi and Associates is the name of my firm. If you look me up.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And also, any opinions on the man in Argentina?
Criminal law or what's that?
Any opinions on the man in Argentina?
Love.
Yeah, he's great, and he loves those Venezuelan immigrants. But anyway, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, go buy my novel, Escape from the Village. Check out my Substack. You can give me money at buymeacoffee.com. Thank you, Alec Egizi. I hope I can get you back on here soon. I know you're a very busy man, but it's been great having you. Chris Baker, we're out. Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you.